This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Salmond.
Welcome to Scotland Speaks with Salmond, your favourite viewing on a Saturday morning.
Before the football.
Yes, Alex, before the football, as you rightly say, and indeed you can watch on all platforms at any time you choose.
And that's one of the many advantages of an online platform. You can say what you like within reason. You can advertise what you like within reason. And so is the social media age on the cusp of sweeping away the deadwood media? Or is it in danger of devouring itself?
And so for today's show, we turn to the site that Scottish civil servants turn to on the odd occasion they're not working at home, or even when they are working from home. And to find out what their ministers have been up to, yes, it's Wings Over Scotland, the most popular site visited in the Scottish Government.
A few years ago, I had the pleasure of visiting the Reverend Stuart Campbell, Wings Over Scotland, in his home parish of Bath, from where over the last 10 years he's been affronting, bewildering but compelling the gaze of the Scottish political class. This is what he had to say then. So Stuart, now that we're sitting down, tell me about this Reverend business and the dog collar. I mean, what's it all about?
Yeah, that's an odd one. I mean, partly it's just a bit of fun. It really winds some people up. But I originally started doing it because, firstly, just to make myself easier to find on the internet, because obviously Stuart Campbell's a really common name. There's millions of people. If you search for Stuart Campbell, there was a Scotland rugby player, a footballer, there's a canoeist, there's a famous gynecologist, of all sorts of people. So by becoming Reverend Stuart Campbell, I'm the only one of those. But I also used to have a lot of trouble, this still when I was a video game journalist, before politics. I used to get trouble with people who didn't like my video games journalism, sort of sabotaging things like my Wikipedia page. Because there was also a horrible murderer guy called Stuart Campbell. He killed a young lassie, Danielle Jones, I think her name might have been. And people used to sabotage my Wikipedia page by linking any references to me to the page of this murderer guy. So it was partly to stop that happening, to distinguish myself from him and generally from other...
It's not because you're a Ricky Fulton fan, and I am jolly, because yeah. I noticed your recent fundraiser, you've had this last call, you've introduced it as, come on, you're the secret's Ricky Fulton.
There's no secret about it, Alex. Every decent Scottish person is a big Ricky Fulton fan. But yeah, we've repurposed Last Call for our fundraiser this year, and I grew up with Ricky Fulton. I've seen him live lots of times. My granny in Kindorit used to take me to pantomimes at the Pavilion with people like him and the Alexander brothers and Glenn Michael.
So let's dispense with the dog collar before the Unionist press says that you were impersonating a good Reverend in the Alex Salmond show.
I think we've had quite enough fun with him as it is.
So join us after the break to see what the Reverend, or the Right Reverend Stuart Campbell has to say now. We'll see you then.
Welcome back. I'm now delighted to be joined by Scotland's foremost social media commentator, the Reverend Stuart Campbell. Stuart, welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Hello, Alex. How you doing?
Doing good. Now, we've just shown some clips of us talking 4.5 years ago. I want to talk about tradition. Since then, since these heady days in Bath back in 2019, you've retired from your site and then came back triumphantly and are still the dominant social media commentator. I mean, does this give you any satisfaction, or are you thinking of people only started to watch the site once they were under threat of retirement?
Well, no, I mean the mad thing was Wings was still the most popular Scottish politics blog even while we were retired. We were still getting more traffic than everyone else put together. So I don't know what that tells you about the rest.
Well, it tells you that silence is golden, Stuart, obviously. But look, I want to talk about the gestation of Wings back in the days before the independence referendum, where you had a substantial impact, particularly through the Wee Blue Book, which is still well thought of and talked about in meetings today. And then your views, have they transitioned over the years as you become much more critical, certainly of the SNP, and much more concentrated on some other issues? Or do you think the political spectrum has moved? Your views have been the same, but the political spectrum is the one thing that's been moving. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the honest truth of the matter is independence is fairly dead as a political issue at the moment. It's not, there's nothing happening on the horizon. You can't really get normal people interested in it because they don't pay attention unless something's happening. This is what we found during the referendum. This is why we released the Wee Blue Book so late in the referendum campaign. It's because people really just kind of left it at the back of their minds until it was right on the horizon. So people weren't really paying attention until the last sort of couple of months, maybe. So that was when we really kicked it into gear. And 10 years on, people's attention has just faded, and it's now not. I don't really consider it a live issue, partly because the SNP refused to make it one.
But surely it's still the defining issue in Scottish politics. It's still the issue around which political allegiances are made and unmade.
I mean, people's opinions don't change, but their level of attention does. It's like, if you survey people on whether they want to bring back hanging or not, opinion doesn't really change very much over decades even. But it's not an issue that anybody talks about because nobody's going to do it. It's never going to happen. So it's kind of an abstract thing at this stage. So if you ask people, do you believe in independence? Would you vote for independence? They'll say yes, but they don't think about it in their day-to-day lives because it's just not happening. Nothing's happening about it.
And how do you explain, as Scotland's preeminent social media commentator, how do you explain the divergence between SNP support and independence support?
Oh, I mean, there's a whole number of factors to that. I think part of it is definitely the way they have more or less openly abandoned any meaningful pursuit of independence. And also part of it is just the complete hames they've made of domestic governance, and people have lost faith in their ability to lead the way to independence, if you like. I mean, I think it's fair to say that your administration believed as an article of faith in demonstrating that you could do a good job of governing Scotland in order to convince people that Scotland could govern itself. And subsequent administrations have failed very badly at that. And so people have lost faith in them more than they've lost faith in the concept of independence. Because independence is currently a fairly abstract concept, then you can keep believing in it without having to attach faith to the SNP. And that seems to be what's happening according to the polls.
But yeah, it must be a very powerful concept as well, because if you had a party which didn't believe or ostensibly believe in independence, if the SNP had no national question written over them, and they had the track record of government, which most independent observers would say was below average, then you would expect the ratings in the polls to have gone down much further than they've gone down. I mean, they're still neck and neck in many polls leading the Labour Party. How can that be explained other than the independence is still supplying life support for the SNP as a political party?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think without independence as a hook to still try and hang themselves on, they'd be way down where the Tories are now in the UK, maybe even worse. I think you also have to factor in just how inept the opposition is in Scotland. If you had an even remotely competent Scottish Labour Party, then I think they would be streets ahead by now. Because who wants to vote for that instead of the SNP? What would be the difference? How would you even tell?
Now, in terms of your own attitude to the SNP, which has been increasingly bitter in recent years, has that been because of their failure to pursue independence, or has it been because of their anxiety to pursue some other issues like self-identification, of which you comprehensively disapproved?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's clearly both of those things. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they have completely betrayed the independence movement. I don't use that word lightly, but I think they have absolutely destroyed the faith that was put in them by so many people for so long. But yeah, also everything else they've done has been shambolic. They're pursuing these incredibly unpopular policies using the mandate that they were given to pursue independence. And they turn around, if people vote for them for independence, and then they turn around and say, oh, well, you have also voted for everything that was in our manifesto, even if it was half a line at the bottom of page 65. And you have given us a mandate for that, so just shut up. We're just going to do whatever we want. And I find that extremely offensive as well as everything else. But it's also a betrayal of the Scottish people, because most of these policies they're pursuing are hugely unpopular with the electorate, and they're only doing them because they have these votes that people gave them for independence, which they're doing nothing about. I think the way they behaved is disgraceful.
Such is the magic of this programme. I'm now going to imagine a present where you've become First Minister of Scotland and leader of the Scottish National Party and are leading the administration in the Scottish Parliament. You are Humza Yousaf, if you want to put it that way. What would be your first moves in re-establishing the independence campaign? How would you do it?
Well, I mean, Wings has already set out quite some time ago, before even Humza Yousaf was leader, what we think the SNP's independence policy should be. And it's to have, as an article of basic principle in their manifesto, that any election in which pro-independence parties get more than 50% of the vote is in effect a declaration of independence, or a mandate for a declaration of independence. So, and the thing about that policy is it actually takes independence out of the day-to-day political equation, because you just say, well, obviously that's what the SNP should stand for. So in the meantime, we're just going to get on with doing a job of governance. And then when it comes to election time, you know what we stand for. And if you want independence, vote for us. And if we get more than 50% of the vote, that is a mandate that will stand up in the eyes of the international community. And then you just take action. And
action meaning what exactly, Stuart?
Well, in effect, you do issue a declaration of it. You say, we have a mandate from the people. We stood on a platform of declaring independence. We got more than half the vote. We declare independence. And then you seek the recognition of the international community. Because the recognition of the international community, I'm sure you know, is what makes a country become independent. There are no hard and fast rules about it. There are no laws written down about what makes you independent. What makes you independent is if the rest of the world recognizes you as independent. And if you've got a mandate from your people in a free and fair, legitimate election, an election which is, recognized by the UK government as a free and fair election, then there is no argument against your declaration of independence. And my belief is that it would succeed.
Now, when Wings Over Scotland came into being, it was seen as a redress to the mainstream media in Scotland, but dominated by unionism as the country moved increasingly towards nationalism. The mainstream media has continued to decline in its influence and power. It's still almost unanimously unionist, but the social media, where many of us put such great hopes, led by Wings Over Scotland, it seems to be almost disparate now, and so many platforms almost cancel each other out. What do you see as the interrelationship between the social media and the mainstream media? Do you still see the two in competition, or do you think that there is a difficulty in seeing it that way just because of the plethora of platforms?
I mean, I think they really exist in separate worlds now. There's very little sort of interaction of any kind. I mean, Wings itself does much less of what we used to do back in the Indie Ref campaign, which was scrutinise the claims of the media, because the media makes very few claims now that are injurious to the independence movement. It doesn't bother because it knows that it isn't really a live issue. It doesn't have to bother misrepresenting things because people aren't listening. So
if you stop reading the Daily Mail or the Daily Express or the assorted other publications, or the Scotsman for that matter.
No, well, I don't think anybody reads the Scotsman anymore, but yeah, I still have to wade through the Times and the Daily Record and whatnot every day.
And you don't think they misrepresent the cause of independence or the national movement? Don't we still need Stuart Campbell analysing them forensically and tearing them to bits?
Well, most of them just steal my stories now anyway, so Wings content is already in the Daily Record on a fairly regular basis.
Unacknowledged.
Of course, yeah. That goes without saying, as it does. But no, I mean, I really don't think they bother very much. I think they've given the SNP a surprisingly soft ride in the last few years. And the reason that I think they've done that is because they no longer see the SNP as any kind of threat to the union. So there's very little sort of content to be had in scrutinising the mainstream media at this particular time. So most of the online media, as far as I can see, has kind of spun off into its own fields of interest. You've got people like Robin McAlpine doing his forensic analysis of the mechanics of government, on which he's phenomenally good. And then you've got other people just kind of feeding the die-hard SNP faithful what they want to hear. And then you've got other people, obsessing over the gender identity theory and all kinds of similar stuff that obsesses the SNP. And it's very, very fragmented now. There's the new media used to support each other a lot back in the Indie Ref times. And nowadays, if they're not actively at each other's throats, they just kind of pretend each other doesn't exist. So it's a very, very different world that we're in now to the one we were in 9 or 10 years ago.
Well, you're a man yourself who's not been known to dodge many arguments, Stuart. But will you do me a favour? Will you, just as even one last hurrah, take one of the outrageous claims of the mainstream media coming up soon and demolish it forensically, item by item, just for old time's sake? Would you do that for me?
I'll see what I can find. Yeah.
Now, listen, looking ahead, Stuart, now you're out of retirement, still the preeminent social media commentator. What do you see as, instead of commenting on the lack of fire in the SNP and the independence cause, how do you see yourself, or do you see yourself having a role in reigniting it or getting it moving again?
I mean, Wings is ready to spring into action whenever there is any kind of independence campaign again, because I still fundamentally believe in independence. It is still the best way for a country to run its affairs, is to run its own affairs. But yeah, in the absence of any of that going on, our focus is kind of on removing the main obstacle in the road to independence at the moment, which I see as being the SNP. We've got a great big dead elephant blocking the path. And until we get it shoved into a ditch, it's gonna block any hope of meaningful progress. So if I've changed my focus to more attacking the SNP, it's because the focus of Wings has always been on the enemies of independence. In 2013, that was the unionist parties and the Scottish media. In 2024, I'm afraid it's the SNP.
Well, of course, Robert Cunningham Graham once said that the enemies of Scotland were not the English, a great and noble people, but those Scots who are born without imagination. Would that be the Wings thesis as well?
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, I noticed, Stuart, that you've arrived without your dog collar. Have you lost faith in organised religion as well as some organised political parties?
Oh no, I still believe in the deity that I've always believed in.
But of course, one accolade which no other social media commentator can claim, or even I think mainstream newspaper, perhaps the Times for London civil service, is your claim, in fact, your evidence that you are the most read social media commentator among the Scottish government civil servants. Why is that?
Well, who could tell? I mean, maybe they want to be able to get their excuses ready early. I would think that when anybody is doing, I hope that when anybody is doing a really bad job, they can feel Wings' eyes on them.
But you think it's an early warning system to warn unsuspecting ministers that the shadow of Wings is above them, ready to swoop?
I think they want to know what they're getting away with. Yeah.
And finally, Stuart, a message for your faithful audience. Tell them that you're going to be around for some time to come, would you?
Oh, as long as our readers still want us, we're not going anywhere.
Stuart Campbell, thank you so much for joining me with that reassuring thought on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Bye-bye.
Last week's show was about the politics of protest. Here's a reminder of what seasoned campaigner Tommy Sheridan had to say.
Right, very finally, Tommy, back to Scotland. How important is that marching, that protesting in terms of furthering the political cause of independence, which you and I have proclaimed for many, many years?
Alex, you know as well as I do that without protest, without marching, 14th of September, we are going to have the 10th anniversary of the Hope Over Fear rallies in George Square to announce to the whole of Scotland and the world that we may have lost a referendum in 2014, but we won the argument. We won the hearts and minds of the young people of Scotland, Alex. You know that independence is inevitable because we've won the argument. We have to maintain the pressure by getting people onto the street. You're hopefully going to be addressing that rally. We're going to be marching through Glasgow and we're going to be saying loud and clear, in an independent Scotland, we will be with Palestine. We will be against selling guns and arms to Israel. We will stand on the side of the peacemakers, not the warmongers.
And this is what you had to say about that programme. Craig says, what an orator Tommy Sheridan is. All these years later, it's clear he's still got fire in his belly. Independent 7 says, to all those people either too young to know the history of Scotland's turbulent relationship with Westminster or just willfully ignorant, asking, what's the point of protest? Watch and learn. Love from Scotland. Free Palestine. Geronimo says, awesome show, flipping great, inspiring, powerful and passionate. We can do it together. Roll on our Republic of Scotland ASAP, please. I love the history, so important to chart the future for all of us. Davidson says, empire and American hegemony absolutely waning. Jacqueline says, another great show, thanks all. Good to see Tommy still a firebrand. I too remember the telephone trees. Thank you very much indeed for your comments. Please do keep them coming in because we love reading them, whatever they say. And now we turn to Alex's favourite part of the show, Scotland's Hidden Heroes, in association with Flagship Media. Today, Alex is out and about in a very special place to bring you a very special hidden hero. I've let him out the studio just for 5 minutes.
Now, most of our stars in the Hidden Heroes series have been doughty fighters, rebels, nationalists, people like Thomas Muir or John McLean or Mary Barber, struggling against the establishment in a valiant way. Today is somewhat different. today is a Tory. And therefore, for those of you of nervous disposition, this is probably the time to look away. Because today's hidden hero is David Maxwell Fyfe, the first Earl of Kilmuir. David Maxwell Fyfe, born at the dawn of the 20th century, was a Scot in the make, an upper-class Scot with his mother's aristocratic connections in the north of Scotland. His father was the rector of Aberdeen Academy. And he went through a very familiar career route for people of that disposition. He went to George Watson's, to Balliol College, Oxford, and then entered Conservative politics. He is, I suppose, everything that I'm not in terms of political inclination. He was a die-hard unionist. He was very regressive in many of his social views. He wasn't particularly impressed with homosexuality. As homosexual, in fact, he had introduced a reign of terror, whereas I, as First Minister, of course, introduced equal marriage. He was supportive of the death penalty, and even when there was huge calls for its abolition, as Home Secretary again resisted these calls. But you know, a hero can be a hero for many reasons. And David Maxwell Fyfe in his career did two great things. The first of those was to act as the lead prosecutor from the UK side, at least, in the Nuremberg trials. And his cross-examination of Hermann Göring and the prickling of that pompous ass and the evil man in terms of cross-examination was generally considered to be a masterpiece of its kind. But that was a great thing to do. But secondly, in the immediate post-war period, he was very much involved in the formation of the European Convention, and he was the key drafter of the Convention on Human Rights, the foundation document of the Strasbourg Court, which many people over the last 70 years have sought and got justice from, and which introduced a rule of law and respect for human rights for the countries across Europe. So despite his conservative and unionist politics, David Maxwell Fyfe did two great things. In the 1950s, Maxwell Fyfe was considered a lively candidate for the Tory leadership. He was pipped by Anthony Eden. And when he failed to get that, he went to the House of Lords as the Bard of Dornoch and then latterly the Earl of Kilmuir. He was Lord Chancellor in Macmillan's government to be sacked summarily in the Night of the Long Knives in 1962. It's said that Maxwell Fyfe complained to Macmillan that he'd been given less notice of his dismissal than you would give a cook, to which the wily Macmillan replied that good lawyers were 10 a penny and good cooks were extremely difficult to find. David Maxwell Fyfe, the first Earl of Kilmuir, who took on that title to show that perhaps, despite all his other southern and metropolitan inclinations, his heart really was in the Highlands. And despite his right-wing Tory views, a man who did two great things in his life, and therefore, in my estimation, worthy of an entry into Scotland's pantheon of hidden heroes.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
I said earlier in the show that the Reverend Stuart Campbell, Wings Over Scotland, has affronted, bewildered but compelled the political class of Scotland for 10 years and more. And he's done these things in equal measure. He affronts people because he takes very decisive views and often in very decisive language. He bewilders people because often he seems to go off on tangents. People have looked for the site to have an analysis and support for Scottish independence suddenly find they're reading endless screeds about self-identification. Incredibly well written, incredibly powerfully written, but nonetheless not what they expected. But compelled because the evidence is that, friend or foe, Wings Over Scotland still commands the greatest social media audience in the country. Now, a number of reasons for that. Firstly, there's loyalty that people have because this came into being as the social media site with the strength and the power and the reach to take on the deadwood media, the mainstream media, who in the run-up to the independence referendum were solid as a phalanx arguing against Scottish independence. And of course, in the case of the broadcasting media, anti-BEB, anti-BBC, suddenly turned out to be just part and parcel of the mainstream conspiracy to do down the cause of Scottish independence. So Wings Over Scotland was Scotland's champion. It was the alternative voice, the voice of the people, the voice that debunked the mainstream media and set forward an alternative perspectives. And in talking to Stuart today, I wonder just how much of that spark can be reignited. He's quite disillusioned, not with independence, he says, but with the SNP's lack of strategy, lack of anything in terms of moving towards it. But then, of course, there is the point, if we're going to get shoulders to the wheel, then everybody has to put their shoulder to the wheel. They can't just wait for everybody else to do it, they have to do it themselves. I've got no doubt there is something deeply significant in 50% of the vote still advocating for independence when the party of independence has largely ceased agitating for it. I think that's deeply significant. I think there's a sleeping giant waiting to be awoken. And I do think it requires all of us in the social media to do our bit to try and ignite the flames. Stuart Campbell's undoubtedly right that the hopes that we had for social media as defeating the grip of the mainstream media haven't been realised. I mean, the mainstream media continues to decline in influence, certainly, but social media hasn't been able to speak with the unity of voice. I don't mean the unity of opinion, but the unity of voice, saying here is the alternative canvas, the grand inquest of the nation from which people can now get their news. The trouble is that social media spends, as he says, a great deal of time at each other's throats, not at the throats of the unionists or the throats of Westminster government. And until we get that, until we get both a sense of a unity of purpose around diverse opinions, and of course that sense of mission, that the social media, in terms of communicating a message for the people of Scotland, is perhaps our last best hope. Until we get that message across, then that's one of the ingredients that keeps the cause of Scottish independence still in abeyance as we await for the time to come where the majority opinion in this country will assert itself and take on itself the right of self-determination and the ability to mould our future in the best interests of our people. And so we're going to go back to Taz, who's going to close out the show with a very interesting message.
Well, that's all for this week's show, folks, and we hope you've enjoyed it. Please remember to write in with your comments to us and, of course, to Wings Over Scotland. I'm sure the Rev Stu will be keen to hear what you had to say about his appearance on today's show. Now, remember, you can watch Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond across all media platforms. More than you can shake even a stick at, to quote Alex. So please do join us next week at our premiere time of 10 AM on Saturday morning. And yes, before you say it, afore the football. Until then, take care.
This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.